Good morning, all the nerds out there. I hope you all are doing fine. And guess what? As you can see over your screen, we are going to discuss about gender studies. And remember, it has three parts. Why? Because gender studies is a kind of vast topics, and we cannot cover this in just one video, so we are going to have three videos. So here it goes, guys. First of all, we are going to discuss what is feminist literary criticism, what is gender studies, and all these sort of things, right? So as I told you, these fields have a lot to offer, and they are incredibly relevant to our understanding of gender, identity, and society. So, guys, grab your favorite snacks because it's gonna be a long class. First off, let me tell you what is gender studies. It's an interdisciplinary field that takes a close look at gender identity and how it's represented in various aspects of our life. Whether it's examining masculinity or femininity or the experience of LGBTQ's community. Gender studies, remember, is all about understanding the nuances of gender. One interesting concept that emerged in gender studies is the idea of gender performativity. Remember this. This term, popularized by philosopher and gender theorist Judith Butler, that suggests that gender isn't something fixed but is rather something we perform or act out in our daily lives. Gender studies didn't just pop out of thin air, guys. It originated from women's studies. As I told you, it is a multidisciplinary program. Similar to women's studies, we also have fields like queer studies and men's studies, which examine gender and sexuality from different angles. So, around the 1990s, gender studies gained prominence in Western university, partly thanks to the rise of deconstruction. Right? As I told you, deconstructionism challenged traditional ideas about gender which fit perfectly that the gender studies agenda. We can't talk about gender studies without mentioning some influential figure. And can you guess who? Virginia Woolf and Adrienne Rich, for instance, called for women to rewrite literary and historical text, inspiring generations of feminist authors to create their own narrative. For example, Griselda Pollock and other feminists have also brought their perspective to myth, poetry, and literature, and giving us new ways to analyze these forms of expression through the lens of gender. Don't forget the feminist theory of psychoanalysis, which was championed by thinkers like Julia Kristeva, Braca L. Ettinger. They have taken ideas from Freud, Lacan, and object relation theory to provide unique insights into gender studies. Julia Kristeva, in particularly, has significantly developed semiotics, which is the study of signs and symbols, adding depth to our understanding of how gender is constructed in language and culture. Now let's focus our attention to women's studies. It's another interdisciplinary field that explores topics related to women, feminism, gender, and politics. But don't be fooled by the name. It's not just about women, it also does into issues related to men and gender and how these intersect with politics. Now, moving on to feminist literary criticism, this field takes a closer look at literature, examining how it reflects and shapes cultural assumption and stereotypes. Literature is critiqued in the light of feminist principles and ideology, right? And the specific goals of feminist literary criticism is like discovering and developing the female tradition of writing, interpreting the symbolism of women's writing and resisting the sexism that often present in mainstream literature. As we have seen, feminism has evolved over time, right? And it has gone through four waves. And as you can see, with each having its own focus and goals. Now, I'll tell you, from the first political wave in the late 19th and early 20th century to the academic third wave in 1990s. And now we are in the fourth wave, remember, which is very much like present today. First off, there are three main types of feminism that emerge on the scene. As you can see, uh, right at the screen, the way bottom, we have that three main types of feminism, right? And these are mainstream and liberal feminism, radical feminism, and cultural feminism. So each of these branches has its unique perspective on women's rights and gender equality. In the early days of feminist literary criticism, during the first and second waves of feminism, that's what our topic is, right? Scholars were primarily concerned with women's authorship and how women were represented in literature. This was the era when feminist literary criticism began to take shape. But the story doesn't stop there, guys. The birth and growth of queer studies have strong ties to feminist criticism. This intersectional approach expanded our understanding of gender and sexuality in literature. Now let's talk about gynocriticism. And it's quite important because it's a female perspective on women's writings and was introduced during the second wave feminism. And guess who was that particular person that coined the term? Is Elaine Showalter, who is a prominent feminist critic, argues that feminist critic is an ideological, righteous, angry, and admonitory search for the sins and errors of the past. Gynocriticism, on the other hand, seeks the grace of imagination in a disinterested search for the essential difference of women's writing, and that's who is saying is Ellen Showalter. So Showalter herself became a leading figure in gynocritical criticism with her work called A Literature of Their Own, which was published in 1977. Some of the other figures are Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar. In 1979, they also delved into women's poetry and prose. They were examining how it fits into the broader feminist literary canon. Their work was pivotal in highlighting the contribution of women writers throughout the history. Now, as we move on into the 1980s and beyond, feminist literary criticism evolved even further with the development of more complex ideas about gender and subjectivity. It began to incorporate the critical theory of the Frankfurt School that we have discussed in previous session, and this added the depth to the analysis, exploring how the dominant ideology of a subject shapes societal understanding. Freudian and Lacanian psychoanalysis also became tools in deconstructing existing power relations and understanding the psychological dimensions of literature. So, in the 1980s, again, a group of influential black feminist scholars, including Hazel Carby, Barbara Christian, Bell Hooks, you all must have heard, and others made significant contribution to black feminist scholarship. They brought the intersectional of race and gender to the forefront of feminist literary analysis. And finally, we should not forget the French scholars like Julia Kristeva, Helen Sexos, and Louis Irigaray, who applied psychoanalytic discourse through Freud and Lacan to uncover deeper societal truth about women's place in society and in history, and of course in present time. But anyway, that was all about the introduction, what is feminist literary criticism, gender studies, and of course, we also talked about the three main types of feminism, which was mainstream, liberal, radical, and cultural. So, guys, in our next slide, we are going to discuss about first wave feminism. What this actually is, we'll just dive deeper into it and we'll understand why this emerged and why it is important in gender studies. So, well, guys, picture yourself in the 19th and early 20th century. In various parts of the Western world, things were quite different back then. So, what's the deal with this first wave feminism there? Well, it was all about tackling some legal issues, especially the big one. And can you guess what it is? Getting women the right to vote. Yes, guys, women were fighting hard for their suffrage right, and it was a pretty big deal. Now, here's a fun fact for you guys. Some folks argue that even way back in medieval times, Geoffrey Chaucer's Wife of Bath was like an early example of feminist literary criticism. Right? Who would have thought? But let's fast forward a little bit. There's this lady named Mary Wollstonecraft, right? Who's often called the foremother of the British feminist movement. And her ideas really shaped the suffragette movement. So those awesome ladies, who were campaigning for women's rights. And you know what's cool? Mary Wollstonecraft's ideas were influenced by big thinkers like Rousseau and the whole Enlightenment thing. Again, she dropped a major feminist treatise in 1792, which was called A Vindication of the Rights of Women. This was all about pushing for moral and social equality between men and women. She even had a pamphlet before that, and it was a vindication of the rights of men. But the woman was ahead of her time, right? So, a little bit fast forward again to 1929. You have got Virginia Woolf, right? Rocking the scene with the rooms of one's own. In this gem, she said that for a woman to write creatively and critically, she needs her own space and some financial stability. Imagine that, needing a room to write your brilliant ideas. But anyway, that's what she argued. Right, so that was all about first wave feminism. Now we'll move quickly to our lady Mary Wollstonecraft. Now let's chat about Mary Wollstonecraft, who was a real trailblazer from back in the day. So Mary was this amazing English writer who was all about women's rights and equality. She was like the pro-feminist, right? And her ideas rocked the boat in the late 1700s. Now Mary didn't just sit around talking the talk, she walked the walk, right? And she taught in a school and worked as governess. And that experience inspired her to write a book called Thoughts on the Education of Daughters in 1787. And plus, she penned a novel called Mary, a Fiction in 1788. But a big moment came in 1792 when she published a book called A Vindication of the Rights of Women. So this particular book was like the Bible of feminism and made her a superstar in the women's right movement. As I told you, life wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, and it was same for Mary too. In 1794, she had a daughter named Fanny, but her relationship with her baby daddy went south. She got so down that she even tried to take her own life in 1795. Tough times, right? But Mary wasn't just one to stay down for so long. She went back to London in 1796 and got involved with some pretty radical folks, right? Like William Godwin, Thomas Paine, and even the poet William Wordsworth. She and Godwin got close, and in 1797 they tied the knot when Mary was already pregnant. Now, here's the interesting part. Mary sadly didn't have a whole lot of time to enjoy married life. She passed away just 11 days after giving birth to her daughter, Mary Shelley, who would later become famous for writing Frankenstein, right? And it was a short but sweet marriage. And we should not forget about some of the Mary's other works, and it is mentioned here as you can see. And there is this called Letters, written during a short residence in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark from 1796, which was like a travelogue mixed with some deep thoughts. And there is another called Maria or the Wrongs of Women from 1798, which was published after her death and was a follow up, a vindication of rights of women. Okay, now we'll just move, as I mentioned, it is a Bible for feminists, right? And we'll just move quickly to our a vindication of the rights of women, which was published in 1792. So let's set the scene for this particular slide. In 1790, there was this guy named Edmund Burke, right? Everybody is aware of it. And he wrote this book called Reflection on the Revolution in France. Now, Mary wasn't too thrilled with what he had to say. Burke was all about criticizing the French Revolution, and lots of British folks were on board with him. But, not to surprise, Mary was not. And she fired back with her own book, Rights of Men, which came out just 6 weeks later. Her main issue with Burke was this. She believed that rights shouldn't be all about sticking to old traditions. She said rights should be based on good or reason and fairness, no matter where they come from. Now, here's the real interesting part. Mary argued that women aren't born inferior to men. They just seem that way because they don't get the same education. She wasn't saying women should be bookworm though, but she was saying women should have education. And she thought that a woman's education should match her place in society. So, according to Mary, women are like super valuable members of the nation. They raise kids, right? And can be awesome companion for their husband too. But not in just sit and there and look pretty, right? She believed women should have the same basic rights as men because they're human beings, right? And treating them like decoration and possession is not kind of cool stuff. And Mary was all about treating men and women as a smart, rational being. She wanted a society actually that made sense based on reason. And she had some pretty strong words for the education system back then. And she thought it was deliberately making women shallow and useless. But here's the cool part, guys. Mary believed that if girls got the same chance like boys, women could be amazingly, surpass everyone. And women would be amazing wives and also mothers and especially workers. So there you have this kind of whole perspective that women that Mary Wollstonecraft was discussing about. So as I told you, Wollstonecraft was all about giving women their right place in society and saying we are all human here, so let's treat each other that same way. So anyway guys, that was all about a vindication of rights. Now we'll move quickly to another important literary work, and that is Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. We have already discussed in one particular session on Virginia Woolf. Here will be just brief, and in that brief talk about Virginia Woolf, we'll cover everything what you need to know, right? First and foremost, A Room of One's Own is based on two lectures that Virginia Woolf delivered at Newnham College and Girton College in 1922. Quite important because in exam you will, there are chances that you will get one question based on that particular point. So these colleges were among the first for women at Cambridge, and they play a significant role in the narrative, right? Now, Virginia Woolf's main focus in this work was the status of women, particularly women's artists. She boldly asserted that for a woman to write, she must have two things: money and a room of her own. This is where the famous quote comes from. A woman must have money and room for her own if she is to write. So women argues that men historically have, had the privilege of having their own space for creativity without much effort, while women were denied such spaces. So why is this room so important? You might ask, right? Well, according to Woolf, having a room of her own would provide a woman with the time and space needed for uninterrupted writing. In her time, women rarely enjoyed such benefits due to the centuries of prejudice and financial and educational disadvantages. Woolf passionately believed that these obstacles prevented women from reaching their creative potential. Interestingly, before publishing A Room of One's Own, Woolf noted in her diary that she expected to be attacked for a feminist and hinted at for a sapphist. So this shows how ahead of her time she was in addressing issues related to gender and sexuality. Now let's talk about the intriguing characters and stories within this book. Woolf introduces us to the four Marys, offering different names to her narrator, highlighting the flexibility of identity and the unimportance of names. So these Marys were Lady in Waiting to Marry, Queen of Scots, and their stories provide a historical backdrop Wolf's argument, right? And as you can see, I have mentioned all the names here. Call me Mary Baton, Mary Satan, Mary Carmichael. Any name, because it doesn't have any importance. Then there is this tragic tale of Judith Shakespeare, who is a hypothetical sister of William Shakespeare. Judith is kind of gifted but uneducated and finds herself trapped by societal expectations. Her story highlighted the stark contrast between the opportunity afforded to her brother, who was William, and the limitation imposed on her. It's a kind of, illustration of the challenges faced by women in history. Woolf also celebrates the work of women who broke free from these traditions and achieved success as writers. And she mentioned notable authors like Afra Ban, Jane Austen, George Eliot, and the Bronte's sister like Ian, Charlotte, and Emily. Additionally, she questions the dismissal of Rebecca West as an errant feminist. And in the final section of this particular book, Woolf suggests that great minds are androgynous, emphasizing the importance of intellectual freedom. She passionately argues that to achieve this freedom, one needs financial independence, encouraging her audience to engage in various forms of creative and scholarly work. So, guys, in a nutshell, if you ask me, A Room of One's Own is a thought provoking exploration of the status of women, the significance of creative space, and the importance of financial freedom in the pursuit of intellectual endeavor. So, now we'll move to our next wave, which is Second Wave Feminism. So, Second Wave Feminism, as the date is mentioned, 1960s to 1980s, this was a pivotal period in the history of feminism, marked by significant advancement in the fight for gender equality and a revolution of women's role in society and literature. Let's start by examining the roots of Second Wave Feminism, which were grounded in a critical analysis of male centric literature. Many literary works depicted women as oppressed and demeaned, right? Reinforcing traditional gender roles. So the movement built upon the achievement of earlier feminists and aimed to push for greater equality for women in the Western world. So within the realm of literary scholarship, several influential women challenged past conception of femininity. And these figures are like Mary Ellman, Kate Millett, and Germaine Greer made the significant contributions. In 1969, Kate Millett published Sexual Politics, and which was a groundbreaking work. It explored how patriarchy infiltrated sexual discourse, perpetuating gender oppression So, according to Millett, discrimination wasn't limited to gender but also extended to intersecting factors such as race and class. Now, let's talk about the three phases Toril Moi identified within the feminist movement. First, we have the female phase, where women's work were considered valid but less confrontational. Then came the feminist phase, which was marked by the criticism of women's social role. Finally, we have the feminine phase, where it saw female writers adhering to male values. Now we'll quickly move to our focus to Simone de Beauvoir, who is a pioneering figure in socialist feminism, and she left an incredible mark on this era. She integrated the themes of existentialism into her literary works and significantly influenced feminism existentialism. Her novels like She Came to Stay and The Mandarins showcased her literary power. However, her magnum opus, The Second Sex, is a foundational work in the history of feminism, shaping the movement globally. So, de Beauvoir's writings paved the way for future feminists like Kate Millett, Sulamit Firestone, Juliet Mitchell, Anne Oakley, and of course, Germaine Greer, who all drew inspiration from her groundbreaking ideas. Let's touch on some notable ideas associated with Simone de Beauvoir. She introduced this ethics of ambiguity, which is actually argues that it's impossible to base an ethical system solely on Jean-Paul Sartre's work. She also developed feminist ethics, which actually highlighted the undervaluing of women's moral experiences in traditional ethical theory. Additionally, her philosophy of existential feminism explored how relationships with others shape our choices and limitation. In summary, Second Wave Feminism was transformative period in the pursuit of gender equality and redefining women's role in society and literature. Now, one of the important work that we are going to discuss is The Second Sex, which was published in 1949. It's quite important and also for your exam too. So this book, as I told you, published in 1949, is nothing short of a revolutionary. And it remains a cornerstone in discussion about gender identity and social construct. So guys, picture this. Post-World War II, France, a time of great intellectual era, right? In this backdrop, Simone de Beauvoir gave us her magnum opus, The Second Sex, in two volumes. The first volume called Facts and Myths, and the second is Lived Experience. Quite important because twice they have asked question based on this. So let's explore some of the key points from this groundbreaking work. Beauvoir's famous phrase, "one is not born but becomes a woman," was the first to articulate the sex gender distinction. She separated biological sex from the social and historical construction of gender, along with its associated stereotypes. And this idea laid the groundwork for modern discussions on gender identity. According to Beauvoir, the roots of women oppression lies in their historical and social construction, and as they label other, right? And she argued that women were capable of making choices just as men and therefore could choose to elevate themselves. Yet, societal portrayal of women as inferior led her to define them as the second sex. Again, Beauvoir highlighted historical perspective, including Aristotle's claim that women are female by virtue of a certain lack of qualities, and Thomas Aquinas referring to women as imperfect men and the incidental being. So these notions he argued and also contributed to the oppression of women. Beauvoir challenged societal norms by stating that both homosexuality and heterosexuality are limiting. She championed the idea that the ideal should be to love a human being without fear, restraint, or obligation, regardless of gender or sexual orientation. Beauvoir explored the concept transcendence where individuals take responsibility for themselves and the world around them, as opposed to immanence. This idea of personal agency and responsibility is a recurring theme throughout the book. Now, let me tell you about these two terms: facts and myths and lived experience. So, the book is divided into two volumes, right? Facts and myths, which examines women's role from various perspectives, including anthropology, biology, psychoanalysis, materialism, history, and literature. Beauvoir argued that men had labeled women as the other and used this to justify patriarchal system. In lived experience, she dwelled into the life of a child, comparing the upbringing of boys and girls. She explored the discomfort and societal expectations surrounding puberty and the discovery of sexuality. And this particular emphasized that these experiences are shared by all, regardless of sexual orientation. Right. And at the end, what? Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, as we know, is a very important work that continues to shape our understanding of gender, identity, and societal construct, right? And of course, it challenges us to question traditional norms and encourages us to embrace personal agency and responsibility in the pursuit of equality and freedom. So now we'll talk about another important feminist who is Elaine Showalter, and she is quite important. So Showalter is a kind of powerhouse in the field of literature, feminism, and cultural commentary. So she's not your typical author or critic. She's a trailblazer who has made significant contribution to the way we understand literature and women's writing. So guys, buckle up. We are going to explore about her life and also the work and what she has contributed in this particular field. So let's start by getting to know Elaine Showalter. As we know, she was born in 1941. She's not just your run-of-the-mill writer. She's a literary critic, feminist, and commentator on cultural and social issues. But what really sets her apart is the concept of gynocritic, which is a term she coined and developed. If we talk about her career, in her early career, Showalter wore many hats. She even contributed to People magazine as a television critic, and she's been a commentator for the BBC, right? And now let's talk about her expertise. Showalter is a real expert when it comes to Victorian literature and the fin de siècle, which refers to the turn of the 19th century. She dwelled deep into these eras and her insights are really invaluable. So one of her most creative and impactful areas of work is her exploration of madness and history and literature. She's taken a deep dive into how these themes are portrayed in the literary works, and it's thought-provoking stuff. And Showalter works play a prominent role in the world of women's writing. She's contributed significantly to the portrayal of female characters and the overall understanding of women's experiences through literature. And she's not just a scholar, guys. She also been a part of literary world in a big way. In 2007, she was one of the judges for the prestigious Man Booker International Prize. And that's kind of big deal in literary world. Now, if we talk about her important works, the first thing is toward a feminist poetics that we are going to discuss. And this work laid the foundation for her ideas in gynocritics, and it's a kind of must read for anyone who's interested in feminism in literature. And again, another is The Female Melody. It is about women's madness and English culture. In this book, she examines the relationship between women and madness in English culture over a century and a half. It's a kind of eye-opening. Another is Sexual Anarchy, Gender and Culture at the Fin de Siècle 1990. And here she takes us on a journey through the complex cultural landscape of the turn of the century. Then again, she also wrote History or Hysterical Epidemics and Modern Media which was published in 1997. And it takes us into the phenomena of historical epidemics and how the media portrays them. Again, another is Inventing Herself, Claiming a Feminist Intellectual Heritage, which was published 2001. And this book is like a tour through feminist history. So Showalter here explores the lives of feminist icons, emphasizing the importance of understanding this particular tradition. So remember, all these works are important. You just have to know the names. But what is important toward a feminist poetics that we are going to talk in depth, right? So why wait? Let's move then. So it was published in 1979, right? And it explores the roles of women as both readers and writer and the development of a unique female literary tradition. Guys, let's get started. First, let me introduce this particular theory, right? First thing first, Showalter introduces us to the concept of feminist literary theory. So this theory examines literature through a feminist lens, highlighting the portrayal of women in the male authored text and challenging traditional gender roles and stereotypes. To your surprise, Showalter categorized female models into two distinct types. First is feminist critique, and this focuses on women as readers, aiming to identify and critique the images and, of course, stereotypes of women depicted in texts written by men. And there itself, we got this term gynocritics, and that means women are seen as writers, and the focus shift to women producing textual meanings, exploring the history, themes, genre, and structure of literature created by women themselves, right? And Showalter lens toward gynocritic, this emphasized the importance of women developing their unique literary tradition independent of male values and norms. Here she also mentioned the role of women as readers. In traditional feminist criticism, women are primarily seen as consumer of literary writings, often analyzing texts produced by men. Next point is gynocritics and independence. Gynocritics represent a phase of feminist criticism where women reclaim the role of the writer and explore literature from a female perspective. And this approach deliberately avoids male models and theories in search of a purely female perspective. Again, Showalter acknowledged that women differ in nature, race, culture, and nations, and this emphasizes that there is no universal women's experience. Just like male writers have their tradition, right? Female writers also have their own unique literary tradition. Historically, male critics often neglected and undervalued women's writing. And Showalter stresses the importance of reconstructing the history of women's literature and rediscovering the many talented women writers who have been overlooked. And as I told you, she has developed 3 stages of women's literary history, and that also comes in exam most of the time. So you have to pay attention here. First is the feminine phase, and you should know the date also, 1840s to 1880, right? And here she has mentioned authors like the Bronte sisters, George Eliot, and Elizabeth Gaskell, and they were prominent during this particular phase of time. Women writers in this phase often conformed to male aesthetic standards and even wrote under male pseudonym, and that's not quite good, right? But their works frequently explored domestic and social issues, reflecting the limitation imposed on women. Second, we have the feminist phase, which is from 1880s to 1920s. And here, authors like Elizabeth Robbins, Frances Trollope, the women writers in this period protested against male values and canons, and they challenged these stereotypical depiction of women. And they expressed personal injustice and addressed male biases in their work. And at the end, we have the female phase, 1920 to present. And here she has mentioned authors like Rebecca West, Catherine Mansfield, and Dorothy Richardson. And they emerged during this particular phase. So writers in this period, they expressed themselves as women using language that differed from male writing. They engaged in self-discovery. They also analyzed the female experiences. So that was in the female phase. So remember guys, these three phases are quite important: feminine, feminist, and at the end female, right? So these three phases you should not forget. So if you ask me to conclude this particular work, I would say this is a kind of significant work that sheds light on the evolving landscape of feminist literary theory, and it encourages us to explore the unique contribution of women writers, and they challenges us to rethink the way we analyze literature through a feminist lens. So, as we know, it dwells deeper into feminist literary theory, and of course, keep in mind the rich history and diversity of women's voices in literature. Remember the name here, Feminine Mystique, which was published in 1963. Let's go deep in, talk about this particular term and also the work. Right. So again, this book played a really important role in igniting the second wave of feminism in the United States. Born in 1921 and passing away in 2006. And she was a remarkable feminist writer and activist. She is best known for her groundbreaking work in advancing women's rights and challenging societal norms in the mid 20th century. So as we have the Feminine Mystique here guys, which was published in 1963 as I told you. So it's also credited with sparkling the second wave of American feminism as I told you earlier. But what exactly was the feminine mystique, you are wondering, right? Let me define it for you. So according to Friedan, the feminine mystique encapsulated the idea that a woman's fulfillment was restricted to a singular role, like that of a housewife or housewife mother. So Friedan's research and motivation. Actually, Friedan's journey into writing this, The Feminine Mystique, was sparked by fascinating turn of event. And can you guess what it is? During the 15th anniversary celebration of Smith College, her alma mater, Friedan conducted an informal survey of her former classmates. And the results were kind of eye-opening. Many of these educated women were unhappy with their lives as housewives. Initially, Friedan intended to write an article based on her finding, but no magazine was willing to publish it, which is kind of underrated, right? And she depicted to turn her research, this particular research, into a book which would become The Feminine Mystique. And she's also known for National Organization of Women, which is known as NOW. So in 1966, Friedan co-founded and became the first president of NOW, which is National Organization for Women. Now aimed to bring women into the mainstream of American society, advocating for full equality with men. And Friedan's book and activism challenged the prevailing belief that women should not aspire to work outside the home, pursue education, or have political opinion. She sought to demonstrate that women were dissatisfied and unable to express their true feelings under these constants of the feminine mystique. So as we know, Friedan's activism with NOW further solidified her legacy as a pioneer in the women's rights movement. Now another important figure here, as you can see over the screen, Germaine Greer and the female eunuch. Very important. Again, this question asked in the previous exam. Right, as we know, she is an Australian writer and public intellectual who made a huge impact on feminist thought in the 20th century. As I told you, she is a very important figure in the world of feminism, so we should really pay attention here. And this particular work, The Female Eunuch. Okay, the first off, she was born in 1939 and she's known for being one of the critical voices of the radical feminist movement during the second half of the 20th century. She has written extensively on various topics, but her most famous work is The Female Eunuch, and which is important for us too. Right, and it was published in 1970. Now, the title of this book might raise some eyebrows, right? The female eunuch. What it could mean? Well, guys, Greer's thesis in this groundbreaking work is that traditional societal role, particularly the suburban consumerist nuclear family, especially rob women of their vitality and render them eunuchs. So she argues that history and society impose a passive role on women, and she's not holding back with her critique. But Greer doesn't stop there. She continued to be a strong voice in the feminist movement, exploring topics like literature, feminism, and environmental issues in some other works. And some of her other notable works include like Sex and Destiny, which was published in 1984, The Change 1991, and The Whole Women is 1999. And of course, the recent book was The Boy, which was published in 2003. So speaking of The Whole Woman, this book is actually a sequel to Female Eunuchs and which was published in 1999. In this work, Greer provides a feminist analysis with a mix of polemic and scholarly research. So the book is divided into section titled Body, Soul, Love and Hate, where she delves into historical definition of women's self-perceptions and also criticizes modern consumer societies for imposing limitation on women. One of the key takeaways from Greer's work is her critique of what she sees as the shaping of female normality by masculine stereotype. She famously said, "The world has lost its soul, and I my sex." So this emphasizes the loss of authentic self-expression for women in a society dominated by traditional gender roles. So Greer also had some irreverence for Sigmund Freud
Now we'll
and
quickly move
psychoanalysis,
to
which was
another
inspired
important
by
figure,
Simone de
Betty
Beauvoir in the
Friedan,
second sex,
and
right?
the
And this
feminine
demonstrates
listing,
her
which is quite
willingness
important.
to challenge established ideas and pave her own way in feminist discourse. So that was all about Greer and her work, The Female Eunuch, guys. And now we'll quickly move to another important figure, Kate Millett and Sexual Politics, which was published in 1970. So let me tell you about her life first. Millett was a multi-talented American figure, known for her roles as a writer, educator, artist, activist. She played an important role in the women's movement of the 1960s and 70s, making her a prominent figure in Second Wave Feminism. And some even consider her radical feminist for her bold and unapologetic approach to women's rights. Our journey with Kate Millett begins at St. Hilda College, Oxford, where she made history as the first American woman to earn a first class honor degree. And this academic foundation set the stage for her future groundbreaking work. One is Sexual Politics, 1970. It is one of her most famous work, which originated from her thesis at Columbia University. This book is a cornerstone of feminist literature. So in it, Millett explored the subjugation of women in popular art and literature throughout the 20th century, focusing on the prevalence of male dominance. She argued that sex had a neglected political aspect, and she discussed how patriarchy influenced sexual relations, especially in the works of authors like D.H. Lawrence, Norman Mailer, Henry Miller. On the flip side, she praised the more nuanced gender politics of homosexual writer Jean Kennett. Again, Lisa Featherstone, who was a journalist and contributed the achievement of rights such as legal abortion, professional equality between the sexes, and sexual freedom to Millett's effort. And Millett's work played a significant role in challenging societal norms and advocating for women's rights. And Millett's personal life and experiences were not without a struggle. She faced torment, especially due to her disclosure that she was a lesbian. And this led to write two autobiographical books like Sita, 1977, and AD, a memoir, 1995, in which she opened her up about her own journey and challenges. There was another work, In the Basement. There, Millett addressed the horrifying subject of abuse, torture, and murder of a young woman by teenagers under the protection of an older woman. This book shed light on the dark aspects of society and underscored her commitment to addressing social injustice. There was another work, Going to Iran, and there Millett attacked political oppression in Iran after the rise of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, and it demonstrates her concern for global issues. There was another work, The Looney Bin Trip, and this book draws from her personal experiences as a psychiatric patient, and it offers insights into the challenges faced by individuals dealing with mental health issue. And at the end, we have two works like The Politics of Cruelty, which was published in 1994, and another is Mother Millett, which was published in 2001. And these works further showcases Millett's dedication to addressing various aspects of society, including cruelty and motherhood. Now let's focus our discussion on Sandra M, Gilbert and Gubar. As you guys know, Gilbert and Gubar, and they are famous for The Mad Woman in the Attic, which was published in 1979. But before that, we want to talk about who are they actually. So these two, Gilbert and Gubar, were two prominent American literary critics and made waves in the world of feminist literary theory, and also in psychoanalytic criticism and second wave feminism. That's why we have put in our session here. They are most celebrated for their collaborative masterpiece. As you can see over your screen, there is a photo at the right side, The Mad Woman in the Attic, which was published in 1979. So this text is a cornerstone of the second wave feminism, and we'll explore this, right? But first, let me talk about them. So they were part of the second wave of feminism, which is important that you should remember. And this aimed to move beyond the initial theories of first wave feminism. And they wanted to do more than just reject the oppressive patriarchal order or seek reform. They sought to delve deeper into the complexities of women's role and representations in literature. Now let's shift our focus to the Mad Woman in the Attic. The full title is The Woman Writer and the 19th Century Literary Imagination. So the title itself comes from Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, where Bertha Mason, who's a Rochester wife, is right, and she was hidden away in an attic apartment. In their book, Gilbert and Gubar conduct a feminist analysis of Victorian literature, examining the works of Jane Austen, Mary Shelley, and then we have the Bronte sisters, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, George Eliot, Christina Rossetti, and Emily Dickinson. They are quite important here in this particular work, and you should remember, because sometimes they might ask. So one of their key argument in that 19th century women writers often felt confined to portraying female characters as either angels or monsters. So these two terms you should remember how they portrayed, especially in the Victorian era. So male writers tended to reduce female characters to these extremes: pure, angelic women or savage, unkempt, mad women. To support their thesis, Gilbert and Gubar refer to Virginia Woolf, who urged women writers to kill the aesthetic ideal that had constrained them. They emphasized that neither the angel nor the monster accurately represented women or women writers. They encouraged a female writer to transcend this reductionist patriarchal interpretation and seek autonomous self-definition in their work. So this particular anxiety of authorship, this anxiety reflects the lack of legitimating role models for 19th century women writers. In a male-dominated literary world, women struggled to find, place and of course mentor. Gilbert and Gubar also revealed a fascinating idea: the presence of a feminist subtext hidden within conventional narrative. They argued that beneath the surface design of these literary works lay deeper, less socially acceptable meanings. This notion challenges us to look beyond the obvious and recognize the subtle, subversive themes that women writers embedded in their work. So in conclusion, Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar's Mad Woman in the Attic is a groundbreaking text that uncovers the struggles and limitation faced by women writers in the 19th century. And as you know, it challenges us to rethink traditional literary interpretation and encourages us to seek a more nuanced understanding of women's role in literature. And their work continued to inspire feminist literary criticism and serve as the reminder of the importance of diverse voices in the world of literature. Right. So guys, that's the end of today for this particular session. And in our next session, we are going to continue with the third wave and fourth wave. And of course, we'll move to psychoanalytic feminism and of course, queer study, which is quite important. And they have been asking questions from that session too. So let me tell you one thing. From this particular video, you'll get 3 questions from that itself, right? So it's very important that you should watch and you should make a note. Otherwise, I'll provide PPT in your app. You can just go and download the app if you haven't and enroll yourself, and you'll get all the PPTs and all the most important topics that they might ask in the exam. So guys, thank you all and see you in the next video, right? Bye bye and have a good day.